Greetings Commanders, this is Kree here, and I'm an Elite Dangerous content creator. If you'd ever like to catch me live, you can catch me at twitch.tv/Kree, where we have a lot of community events such as Thargoid killing, exploring, killing pirates, and many more. Now in today's video we're going to be looking at a combat adder. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, I don't know why you would do that, but it's a request and I felt like, you know what, why not? So here it is. So let's start with the hardpoints. So with the adder, it has a class 2 and 2 class 1, so a medium and 2 small hardpoints. For the class 2, I've put in a pulse laser, gimbaled, and the 2 small classes I've put in gimbaled multi-cannons. So obviously I'm mixing the thermal and the ballistic weapons together because thermal helps get rid of the shields of your opponent and the ballistic destroys their hull. And obviously you will notice that because all of the weapons are gimbaled, that means that when you've locked onto your target, they will follow them around, obviously with their radius that they are able to actually reach. And there is one thing that you need to keep in mind though, is that if an enemy uses the chaff launcher, that means that your gimbaled weapons will be scrambled. So if you like, I would suggest switching the pulse laser from gimbaled to fixed. So obviously this means that you'll be manually aiming then, and the chaff launcher won't affect the pulse laser when it's fixed. Now on to the utilities. Now for the utility mounts, there's only 2 spots. So what I've gone with is a chaff launcher. So like I had mentioned before, even if your opponent has gimbaled weapons, it will scramble their aim. So having a chaff launcher yourself can be really helpful. And then for the other spot, I've got a shield booster. This is A rated. This is so that you can have more of a protective shell with your shields with this booster added onto your ship. That really does help you out a lot. Now onto the core internal. Now for the core, a lot of things here are A rated because you kind of need it with the adder. It's not exactly the best combat ship, but with these A rated modules, at least you have a fighting chance. So for the armor, I've put in the 1A military grade composite, just so that you do have that 250% bonus for your hull boost. Then for the power plant, I've gone with a 3A because you will need as much power as you can possibly get with this build. That way you won't actually need to put any modules that are a lower grade, just so you can compensate for the power that's used in this build. Next is the thrusters. Because it is a combat ship, it is always good to be able to be fast. So that's why I've put in a 3A for the thrusters. So that way you can have a pretty decent boost and that you can kind of get around and catch up to your enemies if they do try to leave. Next is the frame shift drive. So if you've seen my videos before, you know that I would generally put in the A rated and the highest class that is possible for the frame shift drive, just because it is always good to be able to have that extra jump range. If you're trying to get somewhere, it's going to take you a while if it's too small. Next is the life support. Previously I would put the life support as D rated, just to save on mass, but I have found that especially with combat, it is really good to have an A rated life support module in your ship because of the emergency life support time that you actually have. So with a D, generally speaking, you only get 7.5 minutes of life support to get to a station or somewhere that you can dock and fill up the air in your ship once again. Whereas an A rated, you actually get 25 minutes, so that way you have a little extra time to kill off your enemies before you need to go and repair and fill up that air back in your ship. Next is the power distributor. So naturally this is a 2A. This is obviously because I want to get the most out of my weapons, engines and systems capacity and recharge. Sensors I've also A rated. Typically I used to put that as D rated as well for the same reason as saving on the weight of the module, but with combat, once again, It's more about being able to see your target from further away and with a wider angle. So this way you actually find your targets a lot faster, and if they're further away from you, then you can still keep an eye on them and keep them targeted as you chase after them and take them down. Now moving on to the optional internal. Now because this is a combat build, there's going to be a lot of hull and module reinforcements involved, because we want to make sure that we can last as long as we possibly can in a combat situation. So that's why we have lots of those. So now starting with the shield generator, so we obviously need shields. So going with a 3A is your best bet, only because you have the most amount of shields you possibly can with the 3A. Now, as I said before, there's a lot of hull and module reinforcements. So the highest grade that you can get is D, so don't worry about if you can't find any A's, because they don't really exist. So for the class 3, 3D hull reinforcement, that obviously helps thicken your hull and make you less likely to explode sooner. And then class 2 hull reinforcement, a class 2 module reinforcement. So the difference between a module and a hull reinforcement is that, as I said before, the hull reinforcement thickens your hull, so it is harder for the ballistics and other weapons to get into your ship and destroy your modules. Whereas the module reinforcement is actually to protect the modules themselves. So that way, if someone was to sub-target your power plant, for example, to try and shut you down, the module reinforcement helps negate that. So making sure you have a couple of module reinforcements can really help with your survivability in a combat situation. Which is why the next one, even though it is a class 1, another module reinforcement is definitely what you would need. And then lastly, the last class 1 is another hull reinforcement, because I would say that you probably need at least 2 module reinforcements and the rest hull reinforcements. You can play around with it if you like, and you can find out what you find is better for you. I definitely always suggest that you experiment with your builds. I would suggest using websites like Coriolis and EDSY just to have a play around before you actually spend any of your credits in game. And then lastly, I have the advanced docking computer. I mean, you don't necessarily need this unless you are very new and you're still not comfortable with landing your ship yourself yet. But otherwise, if you are good with landing and taking off, then you can swap this out for another class 1 hull reinforcement package. Now for the details down here, as you can see, the jump range is not that great, but considering it is just a combat ship, you're not likely going to be traveling too far either. And also with this build, you don't have a fuel scoop. If you don't know what a fuel scoop is, it's an optional internal module where you can use the certain types of stars. And if you don't know what types of stars you use to scoop from, the acronym that we use is KGB foam. So those are the star classes that you can use to scoop from. And because this ship doesn't have a fuel scoop, it just means that you'll need to find places along the way to fuel up at if you are traveling further away. I definitely wouldn't suggest using this build because it is unengineered. I wouldn't use this for PvP. PvE, perfectly fine. PvP though, you'll get squashed. And my suggestion is to go to LHS 317. It is a great system. Although with this build, unless you have friends, I would suggest if you're doing this on your own, go to a resource extraction site that is low, medium, and you could possibly try high. Definitely wouldn't do hazardous unless you had friends with you, just because this is a small ship and it doesn't have a lot of power and protection in it. There are some ships that would be better suited for that kind of thing, but if this is your first one, you want to play around, and you've got some friends with you, you can go to any one of those. The last thing I want to mention is that, as you can see here, retracted and deployed. Retracted, with the total power being 12 megawatts. Retracted is 11. but deployed is 12.34, so obviously it is over by 0.34 megawatts. The way you combat this is that when you go into your modules, simply go down to the cargo hatch, go into it, and make sure that it is inactive, or you can change the power priority to 2 or 3 as long as it's not on 1. That way you don't have any modules that shut down on you when you need to bring out your hard points. Now for the fire groups, it is completely up to you how you set this up. I personally like to have the thermal weapons on my primary fire and my kinetic weapons on my secondary in their own fire group. And then in another fire group I could put my chaff in there. And then everything else, so data link scanner, composition scanner, and the discovery scanner. This is obviously just a suggestion, you don't have to follow this, but this is how I like to have my fire groups. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure you give this a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have subscribed, then thank you so much, it really does mean the world to me. Anyway, I might see you on Twitch, I might see you later. Take care, Commanders. Fly safe.